Happy Wednesday, dearies. Let's start here. I have a YouTube friend. His name is SteveTheMissionary, and he's fantastic. And so we wanted to do a YouTube project together, and we figured that the best way to do that would be to do a debate. Because nothing builds friendship like stubbornly disagreeing with each other. So here's the plan. I'm making this video around the statement, we should use the term emotional chastity. Then he's gonna make a response video saying the opposite. And then after that, you'll all side with me because I'm smarter, of course. I mean, love you, Steve. Without further ado, let me explain why we should use the term emotional chastity. I don't know how Steve is going to argue, but I find that most people that don't like the term emotional chastity argue that there are simply other terms that are better. Emotional virtue is a common term that people say is better than emotional chastity, or emotional prudence, or emotional purity. Or maybe somebody will argue that the word emotional is overused. Maybe it is overused, but if I start ranting on how we shouldn't be hating on our emotions, we're gonna be here for longer than I want to be here for. That's kind of one of my favorite rants. Anyways, I don't think there's anything wrong with any of these other terms. They all have their place. They all have their nuance. And, you know, English is big into nuance. For example, I enjoy the term emotional virtue. And definitely if we're talking about relationships, emotional virtue is a topic that would be great to bring into the conversation. But, you know, I would also use the term emotional virtue when I'm talking about self-esteem and how I feel about myself. For example, in my video just last week, I Heart Potatoes, I talked about self-esteem. I asked myself, do I like myself? And went off on that. And while I would definitely say that that video talked about emotional virtue, I would not say that it talked about emotional chastity. If we saw emotional chastity in the title of a YouTube video, we would know that that video would be talking about relationships. If we saw emotional virtue in the title of a YouTube video, the video could still be about relationships. Or it could be about self-esteem, or anger management, or personal value, and a whole slew of other topics. Both these terms have their place in our vocabulary. Don't rob me of my vocabulary, please. S'il vous plaît. I once saw an argument that the term emotional chastity sexualizes emotions. That was a curious thought. I thought about it for a long time, and I continue to think about it. And as I continue to think about it, I also pose this question. Is it more accurate to say that emotional chastity sexualizes emotions, or that emotional chastity desexualizes chastity? Once upon a time I was a religious brother, which meant I had vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. And the vow of chastity of course meant that we weren't going to sleep with anybody because we were celibate. But it meant more than that. When we talked about chastity, we also talked about how we relate to women as religious. Is this relationship something that's proper and that brings us both closer to God? And we also talked about chastity in terms of relationships with other men and brothers within the community. Once again, is this relationship proper? Does this relationship bring us both closer to God? So I'm a big fan of linking the idea of chastity with more than just the concept of keeping one's pants on at the right time. Okay, what is emotional chastity? Granted, I should have answered that question a long time ago, but I was kind of avoiding it. It's tricky because everyone seems to have their own idea of what emotional chastity is. There's these long blogs everywhere where people talk about how to date, and how to flirt, and how to court, and how to marry, and all those awkward and romantic things. And everyone kind of has their own theory on that, including me, actually, but let's gloss over that. But boiled down, this is something that all users of the term emotional chastity seem to agree on. Emotional chastity is the virtue by which we properly manage our interior affections and attachments in regards to relationships with others. Maybe we'll throw words like thoughts and desires into that definition too. Why not? Now, how we do that emotional chastity thing is a whole other conversation. But yes, there are proper ways to manage our insides in regards to relationships, and so having a term that encapsulates that concept is not a bad idea. Guys, the topic of emotional chastity is basically just dating advice. And dating advice has been around for a long time. How cool is it that it's becoming more and more common for people to use the word emotional chastity when they bring up the topic of dating advice, instead of just dating advice. Granted, the person giving the dating advice might not be giving good advice, but that's normal. People have been giving bad advice since Adam and Eve and the serpent. But what's cool about the term emotional chastity is that it sets the entire discussion about dating advice within the context of virtue and faith and morals and God. It brings God into the conversation much more naturally. And having more of God is never a bad thing. That concludes my piece. Steve, I am looking forward to hearing your thoughts. So now, my dearies, we need to wait for Steve to make his response video. I'm gonna guess he's gonna make it by about, say, a week from now. So if today is past October 21st, 2015, you should be able to find a link to his video hopefully, if you click on the upside down exclamation point, which is in the top right side of your screen. I hope I'm pointing the right direction. If that link isn't there, you'll at least find a link to my favorite video from Steve the Missionary, where he compares Jesus to a couch surfer. That's a really dear video to my heart because, well, I was a couch surfer for a long time. Yay. If the upside down exclamation point does not work for you, I will put links to these videos, when the links are available, of course, in the doobly-doo below. Let me know what you think of emotional chastity in the comments below, because this conversation is not over. Also, if you haven't subscribed yet, please find the subscribe button and click that, because that's a very special button. Also, the like button is very special. Ooh, there's so many buttons you can click. And the share button? The share button's great too. At any rate, I will see you next Wednesday. Have a wonderful week. God bless and ciao.